the future of EVs in Africa. So let's just get right into it. My first question will be, and we can start with Tolu for this. So far, since you entered the market, right, as the founder of Siltech, one of the first, one of the main EV manufacturers in Africa. What would you say? Would you say there has been any type of growth since you started? And if there has been, how will you explain that growth to people who are not really familiar with the market?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Where do we start from? Upstream or downstream? In terms of looking at raw materials, mining and extracting, there's the opportunity for us to refine products like lithium, magnesium, and cobalt. Downstream, we have assemblers, manufacturers, component assemblers, providers. So I think the opportunities are vast. We've seen a surge of many new startups and different e-mobility companies popping up, trying to offer different segments of the EV value chain. Currently, like you mentioned, there's about 1.5 to 5% of EVs, of the vehicle population are EVs. And I think currently there's only about 35% of infrastructure to support this. So I think definitely the infrastructure needs to go ahead of the growth. I think there's a lot of growth in the industry, and I think it's very vibrant and very ripe with a mixture of global and both local players.
Yeah, the same question to you, Adetayo. So, you've also been in this space for a really long time. I think Max EVs is like, when you talk about EVs in Africa, you have to mention Max EVs, and you've been around for a long while. How would you describe the growth so far?
Yeah, good. Still morning everyone. Very excited to be here. Yeah, over the last, the EV journey started quite a while back, right? Tolu here is definitely one of the very, very early pioneers of the industry. I think at Max, we started working on EVs around 2018. I think Tolu had been working on it maybe 5 or 10 years before, when nobody knew what an EV meant. And then, of course, when Max started thinking about EVs, we brought Tolu on as a consultant to help us think through a lot of things and figure out some of the aspects of the supply chain. And when I think about when this journey started for us, 5, 6, 7 years ago, so much has changed. Back then, you could not see a single EV on the streets, none. And then, of course, eventually started seeing a few motorcycles here and there. And then 3, 4 years ago, we started seeing a few Teslas in the country, right? But I want to go back a little bit to explain what really is driving EVs. So if you think about, the UN Sustainable Goals and all the other stuff, and climate change as a whole, that has been a huge incentive for the transition to electric vehicles, right, to reduce carbon emissions. Because transportation is one of the big areas where we have a lot of emissions. I think transportation is responsible for, 15 to 20% of GHG emissions, right? But what happened, or what changed over the last, 4 or 5 years is EVs went from being cool to being cheap. So if you look at the key drivers of the renewable energy movement, right? 2 of the biggest drivers are, one is the cost of the solar panel, right? So the cost per watt for the solar panels that you see around you over the last 10 years has reduced from about close to $1 to 10 cents right now. That's 10x reduction in cost in the last 10 years. When you look at the battery as well, the lithium-ion battery, right? The same thing has happened. 10 years ago, for a kilowatt-hour battery pack, you might be spending between $600 to $800, right? Right now, the cost per kilowatt-hour for a grade A LFP battery in Greater China is knocking on $55. So that's a 10x reduction in 10 years. So when you look at the acceleration of the technology itself and the massive and the aggressive reduction in costs, that then explains the rapid adoption. So if you look at countries like, let me not pick a developed country, let me pick Pakistan, right? In 2024, Pakistan installed about 17 gigawatts of solar. Compare that, Nigeria's grid, or Nigeria's generation, or grid can support 5 gigawatts, and it's not very regular. Every now and then it shuts down. In 1 year, Nigeria has been running 5 gigawatts for the last 30 years, since I was a kid. It hasn't gone much more than that. In 1 year, Pakistan, a third world country like Nigeria, installed more than 3 times our entire grid capacity in solar. Brazil did about 13 gigawatts. India did 30 gigawatts of solar in 1 year. So what that tells you is that we are in a very aggressive acceleration period. We've crossed the tipping point for renewable energy and for EVs. And so what's happening is EVs have moved from being cool, right, to being cheap. And what is naturally going to happen is adoption is going to accelerate. So going back to your question around the historical growth, it's grown quite quickly in Africa in the last 2 years, but where we are today is still scratching the surface if you look out 2 to 3 years from now. So this is the point where the acceleration actually really starts in Africa. Very exciting times ahead.
Very interesting, yes. So there has been growth, right? But do you think we are where we are? And where do you think we need to be? And what do you think we need to do to get there? That's a follow-up to you, Adetayo.
All right, I can take that quickly. Honestly, I think it's like talking about smartphones, right? Did the government have to come up with any policy for people to start buying smartphones when they became affordable? No, right? So there's nothing that can stop a technology whose time has come. However, there are incentives and things that can also be done to further accelerate it. But the reality is, it is happening. It's not about it's going to happen, it's happening, right? When Tolu started working on it 15 years ago, or however long he's been working on it, there was zero government policy. There was zero incentives, right? Now, there are actually incentives now. For example, with the Nigerian government already, there is the VAT-free and duty-free. If you, of course, go through the right processes and you get the right waivers, you can bring in EVs into the country with zero duty. If you bring in a petrol engine, you are paying 30, 40, 50% in excise duty and VAT charges. So that already is an incentive. Even more so, depending on how you look at it, the fact that our grid doesn't work in Nigeria is a massive incentive to adopt solar. So if you look at our cost in the grid as well, you have band A, which is 200 to 220 naira per kilowatt hour, right? And you still don't really get reliable power, even on a band A. If you step down to band B, which is about 70 naira per kilowatt hour, thereabout, that is far from being reliable. The levelized cost of solar today, right, if you vertically integrate, you can bring it down to as low as 70 naira per kilowatt hour. That means you can build your own constant source of power that is extremely reliable at band B price, right? So, as I said, there's nothing you can do when the technology's time has come. The good thing is that the government policies are also moving in that direction for those that figure out a way to navigate it. But the reality is that the incentives are here. The infrastructure is being built. As Tolu mentioned, there's so many startups in the renewable energy and mobility, e-mobility space popping up right now. And that's because the opportunity is already there. So I wouldn't say that a lot needs to be done, a lot more needs to be done to accelerate, to drive the movement. But there are certain things that can be. If you ask me, what would be my recommendation? Honestly, my recommendation would be to increase the barrier for legacy technology. So if the duty and the total duty cost on a ICE engine, a petrol engine is 50%, I'd say make it 150%. So if you really, really want to drive that LX600, you're a rich man, pay a little bit more to enjoy that luxury. And let those of us that want to use EVs to solve a real problem that affects 99% of our people give us stronger incentives. So I would say the incentives rather should be to increase the barrier for ICE engines and make more money from rich people that want to buy expensive petrol cars.
Okay, I think on that note, my question to you, Tolu, will be, Adetayo is saying increase the incentives, let the person that would have rather bought, an LX570 buy an EV, right? But I think one question that people usually ask when it comes to EV adoption is infrastructure. Right? Do we have the infrastructure for it? And if you are forcing that rich man to go and buy EVs, is the infrastructure available for him to actually use that EV, right?
Yeah, I'll say there's a huge gap in infrastructure. As I said, infrastructure needs to go ahead of vehicle deployments. But we need to highlight like the presidential CNG initiative, which actually encourages the use of new energy vehicles. And then we also have to look at the government policies as well that are in place. So you're encouraged to manufacture and assemble. You can get your assembler's license from NADDC. You can also get IDEX certification, which will give you a waiver on duty on fully built units or semi-knockdown or complete knockdown units. So I think there's some policies already in place that Nigerians don't really know about and they need to take advantage of for us to be able to really scale this up. So I'd say we need to, aside from the incentives that are in place, one similarity we'll look at is like Donald Trump, for instance. So he said any vehicle that is not made in America will attract 25%. So in line with what Tayo said, is exactly the same thing. These things need to come from, the policy needs to drive this. So we need to have mandates to have all public transportation vehicles changed to electric or new energy vehicles, and logistics vehicles as well, and also operational vehicles for the government. So once we have this kind of mandates, and then obviously increase the duties on cars that are not assembled or made within Nigeria, then I think we'll be able to increase scale adoption, and we'll also be able to kind of fuel local content. So this will allow assemblers to gain more technology transfer skills and all that. So yeah,
okay,
that'll be my take.
All right, very interesting one. But I think I still have another follow-up for you, Tayo. And Tolu, like Tolu said, we need to move to get those public vehicles going towards more renewable energy sources, whether it's batteries or CNGs, right? And then you've also made a case for policies where they increase the barrier for ICE vehicles and things like that. But what policies, or should I say because the infrastructure gap is also very important, because for me, I would personally say before you do those things, right, you need to fill those infrastructure gaps. And you might say that's not necessary, but that's the first question. Do we need to fill that infrastructure gap? If we need to, whose job is it to do that, right? Where does the government come in? Where do people like you, Max EV, and Siltech come in?
All right, sure. So let me start by saying 100% support what Tolu has said around. There's still more policies that can be made, particularly on the infrastructure side. 100% agree. I think it's not very complex. You can just look at what some other countries have done, right? You can look at what Ethiopia is doing. You can look at what Rwanda has done. You can look at countries like Nepal. Nepal's government is building 500 fast charging stations for cars, right, on highways. The government took that up and they're building that out by themselves, right? And that's stuff that can be done here as well. State governments, it doesn't even have to come from federal. The state governments as well can integrate charging infrastructure into their energy master plan and actually start either investing in it directly, or they can set up public-private partnerships with private companies that already have the expertise with building high-quality charging stations and situate them along highways and all the corridors that cars frequent, right? So I agree that the infrastructure aspect is really important and critical, especially for heavier duty vehicles like cars and so on. For motorcycles and three-wheelers, which is where Max has played the most, we can build our substations out ourselves, right? Like it's not a big deal. We can power them with solar. It's not a big deal. With cars and higher capacity vehicles, it's a bit more tricky because the power and the energy needs are they're more significant. And you have to integrate that plan into like the urban strategy or the urban planning at the state and also at the federal level. So I'd say one is the government itself can invest in charging infrastructure. Two is the government can set up public-private partnership agreements with private companies and entities to execute on this, right? If I could think of one other thing that can be done is incentives also for charging infrastructure. So for example, one other thing you can do is to say, for folks who go and buy power, or for power companies that set up charging stations, for every charge that they dispense, or every kilowatt hour of energy they dispense, the government will pay them some sort of bonus on top of that, right? So you can then use subsidies, or you can use some sort of financial incentive structure to accelerate. And if you think about it, the biggest challenge that the discos in Nigeria have today is a lot of them actually reject power from the grid because they can't sell all of it. There's not enough quality demand. So one of the biggest issues we have with power in Nigeria is not demand, it is quality demand. So the fact that 1 million Nigerians don't have power doesn't mean 1 million Nigerians are willing to actually pay for it, right? We all know the problems we have with illegal connections and all that. So one of the big challenges that the discos face is figuring out more and more ways for people to actually be happy and willing to pay for electricity. So I actually see a big opportunity for the discos between them and the government to sort of like give them some mandates as well to channel their power significantly towards charging infrastructure at designated locations. Even if they don't want to build the charging stations, the government can have a roadmap to say, power should be made available at X number of points across the state so that folks like Siltech or whoever else is building charging stations know that they can just connect to power. Because one of the biggest headaches for folks building heavy-duty charging stations today is they have to figure out the source of power. So now that you're talking to Ikeja, you're talking to a co, you're talking to an independent, power company as well. All of that is not trivial. It's quite complex. You have to talk to a lot of people, do a tremendous amount of planning. But if some sort of strategic plan is created for the discos to make power available specifically for charging applications across specific corridors, and the government gives them incentives to do that, then private companies will take full advantage of that.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for that. So a lot of interesting points have been made. So I'm having a lot of follow-up questions, right? And one will be to you, Tolu. You're currently building networks, right, of charging infrastructure, right? I think I saw one last year, right, at the Siltech office, right? And, like Tayo said, you need incentives to build more of these things, right? Because if, like you both said, if we are going to tell that rich man to, instead of buy the LX570, why not buy, an EV truck? Maybe you're telling me to buy a cyber truck or something, right? We need the infrastructures in place. And, Tayo said, yes, give the incentives for people to do those things in strategic areas. But for you personally, that you are currently building these charging stations, these infrastructures, how would you, what kind of incentives do you think you would need, right, to do these things at scale? If you could give us, what the current challenges are, right? What you think you need to surmount those challenges, incentive-wise or investment-wise?
In line with what I said, I think definitely subsidized energy tariffs and energy guarantee as well. Because it's one thing to say you have a charging station. It's another thing for you to have energy for the lifespan of vehicles that can be financed or used for commercial or operational logistics. So we definitely need that incentive. And I think it's a partnership between private and public. We need to work together because EV ecosystem development is like niche and it's very unique to different startups, diversified energy, and different kinds of terrains. One thing I'll talk about is closed systems. So most EV ecosystems you see in East Africa and Nigeria, they all work, they're not agnostic. So basically, you can't, Max bikes will not be able to swap at ampersand stations, for instance. So we need to work with the government to standardize some of these batteries, chargers, and even unique components that all these bikes and tricycles use, from controllers to motors, batteries, and indeed chargers. Standardizing this will allow us to scale more, and it just means that because with an ICE engine, you can go anywhere to fill your petrol. Yeah. So that mind state has already been around for centuries. So changing that and having people kind of trapped in one ecosystem is kind of like a barrier. So definitely standardization needs to come in, and that's where organizations like Standards Organization of Nigeria and Manufacturing Association of Nigeria come in, as well as NADDC, to help ensure that some of these policies are put into the market very, very early to ensure that we have a very scalable future.
All right, thank you very much. So, yeah, I just remembered something very interesting about EVs. I was doing this research on, cars in general, right, automobiles, and I noticed that, some of, when cars came out at first, it started with IC. At some point, batteries, EV cars were actually used at the early days, right, as far back as, I can't remember the years now, maybe the 1950s or so, like about 50% of the cars in New York were powered by batteries, right, because they had to move to batteries because there was the whole oil issue where there wasn't enough oil to power those cars, and then people started opting for batteries, right, and then at some point there was the oil boom, and then we just went back to. So on that note, my next question now is, do you think that the local players we have, the likes of Max AV and Siltech, are enough to push that, to push that mainstream adoption of EVs again, like we had it back then? I mean, currently, if we are being honest, EVs are not mainstream yet in most part of the world, even in some advanced countries. They are not mainstream yet. So do you think you guys have the capacity to bring it to that point? Or do you think you will need other global players to come into the space? Okay, I mean, you can start, Tayo.
Okay, I can go. It's always very interesting. This sort of question is always interesting because we are co-competitors in the sense that a lot of the players in the industry, on one hand, are collaborators. On the other hand, they can also, in some ways, be competitors, right? But because the opportunity is still so vast and is so early stage, the competition aspect is almost still non-existent. We're like 99% collaborators right now because we're trying to build an industry. And we all have one big, giant enemy. That is ICE engines, right? We all are pointing the guns at the ICE engines. Who knows, in 10 years where we finished destroying the ICE engine giant, then maybe we start, pointing the guns at ourselves. But right now, because it's still very early in the phase and there's tremendous growth opportunity, and we all have like a common enemy, I think there's still a lot of collaboration that absolutely needs to happen. That's number one. The second dynamic here is, or let me start with the short answer is, right now the players alone cannot deliver what needs to be done. However, we all are also trying to scale in so many different ways, right? When we started, we launched 20 EVs, then we increased to 50, 100, then we expanded to Ghana. When we then hit about, earlier this year, we hit about 900 EVs across different manufacturers. We work with TLG, our JKTM3 with Tolu helping us out with that, and then we also deployed Spiral EVs as well, right, and a few other brands. as we've continued to understand the ecosystem, the technical specs of the vehicles, and also consumer demand, what the market really wants and what the market can pay for. There's so many dynamics and complexities. That progressively gave us more confidence to continue to scale, right? So we then hit a point in Q1 where we were confident enough to go in and produce 10,000 at once. So between now and August, we're going to be deploying 10,000 EVs in Lagos, right? That's a massive amount of work and then also a massive amount of spending. So on the one hand, yes, all of the players existing today are not enough. But even when you come into the industry, there are certain things you have to fix. Now, one thing we haven't talked about at all since we started this conversation is the elephant in the room, which is funding. Despite the fact that EVs have become very cost competitive, they are still not cheap. You have to invest in the batteries or in the energy infrastructure. You have to invest in the controllers. You have to invest in the electric motor. You have to invest in an assembly line. You have to ship stuff, right, from outside of the continent and all of that. All of those things are not expensive. So if you ask me, for example, I spend about 75 to 80% of my time in financing conversations. And I spend maybe another 10 to 15% on technical stuff, and I spend the rest on other things, right? So the question is, we're trying to build this fantastic thing called EVs and energy infrastructure and all of that, but the real field that will drive the growth of the industry is the financing. Now, the challenge we face in Nigeria and many parts of Africa is that historically we haven't had a financing industry that is designed to support new ideas. I would protect the person's name. I still spoke with the executive director of one of the leading banks in this country a few weeks ago, talking about this. And the guy told me, you know, why should I put money into this stuff when I can put money in oil and gas and I'll make my money back? Right? And I'm on stage and I'm in a public place. But if I'm being honest, I felt like punching him in the face. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? But the financing is a big, big thing. And I actually think that the government also has a very significant role to play in there. Because if we're going to accelerate the growth of EVs, we have to figure out this financing thing and make it available for the EV companies and innovators who have proven themselves have to be able to access capital at scale to build out this infrastructure and to roll out electric vehicles at scale to make it affordable to consumers. Because the reality is, the cheapest EV today, the cheapest electric motorcycle today, cheapest, you are still going to spend, I don't know, 1.5 million naira at the minimum. At the absolute minimum, you spend 1.5 million naira. How many Nigerians that need motorcycles can bring out 1.5 million naira from their pockets to buy an electric motorcycle? Which then means we have to create funding mechanisms, lease to own, rent to own, leasing models, and someone has to finance that. So let's just cut through all the red tape. In order to scale, it's not about more players coming in and deploying 10 bikes, 5 bikes, 10 bikes, 5 bikes. That's not what solves this. What solves this is the funding mechanisms being put in place, being made accessible at scale for existing innovators is what actually solves the problem.
All right, thank you so much for that, Tayo. Yes, I think funding has always been an issue for, I think, hardware in general, hardware startups in general in Africa. And I believe it's something that might change in a few years to come, because I think technology in itself is changing the way, and I'm just going to ask a quick question. Would you say, because you said a lot about financing, but for the technology itself, right, what you need, the kind of financing you need to produce those products, have they become lower, right? Because something I heard recently was that producing hardware products has become cheaper. I don't know if that's true or not, but it has become a bit cheaper, and I got that from an investor. he was a former executive at Andrew Technologies, the defense tech startup in the US, and he said it's becoming a bit cheaper to produce hardware. So, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm keen to hear Tolu's take on this, but absolutely, 100%. I mean, the stats that I read out about the cost of solar panels and batteries has aggressively reduced. The knowledge is democratized now.
Okay. For EVs, this is the
for
same.
EVs, yeah. If you want to buy your electric motor, your electric controller, your LFP cell, the prices are all public. You know, like there's not a lot of room for arbitrage unless you are dealing with a customer who is clueless and doesn't know anything about the industry. But if you put a little bit of effort into it, even if you can't go to Alibaba.com to do your research or made in China, or go to China yourself, go to ChatGPT and type in what is the price of a 5 kilowatt hour LFP grade A battery, and it will give you 10 options and give you the prices. So because of the scale of production, right, now it's not a big risk anymore. So which is also why the financing thing doesn't make sense to me. 5-10 years ago, I understand. But where we are today, what risk are you taking with investing in panels or EVs or batteries? If customer A doesn't want anymore, you take it back from them and give it to B. Everybody wants it. So, you know, like I said, there's so much to say on this, but with respect to EVs, batteries, renewable energy, electric mobility, the hardware is heavily commoditized, heavily modular. There is extreme price transparency, and therefore it is extremely investable. It's only where the financial system is not sophisticated enough, or where your bankers, their heads are too buried in the sand, and they are too stuck in the past, and they don't really know what's going on. And the thing is this, when I think about the financing gap, honestly, I'm not begging the banks. No offense, I'm not being arrogant about it. You can ask Tolu, he's been running this business for donkey years, 100% self-funded, or he's not running his business with some funding from some crazy banker somewhere, right? So whether the banks get in or not, it is happening. Now, here's what is going to happen, and it's sad to say, international investors are the ones that will dominate this industry in most parts of Africa for this exact same reason that our own financial systems refuse to jump on innovation.
All right.
Keen to hear Tolu's view on it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I think for Tolu, maybe we should first answer the question Tayo posed to you. I don't think he did it intentionally regarding funding, right? So that would be like the first question. How has it been for you, funding-wise? Is it also, I'm going to assume it's mostly been the same for you, but, you know, speaking with you over the years, I've also noticed that you tell me that, you know, technically you've also been finding ways to make it cheaper to produce your EVs, you know, using locally sourced materials, and, you know, I think the last time we spoke, the battery was like the main issue, right? Perhaps the most expensive components of an EV, right? So do you think there's still more room, you know, innovative-wise, you know, for you to, are you still working on like, okay, is there a way we can still make it cheaper to produce these things, you know, as Tayo has mentioned, because funding, financing is not where it is supposed to be, right? So the question, it's a two-part question. On the funding side, how are you doing, right? And on the technical side, the innovative side, are you still looking for ways to bring down the cost of producing your EVs?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll say on the funding side, and I'll speak for all of us, I mean, we'll be looking towards tradable finance, access to tradable finance, from development finance institutions, multilateral development banks. And I think the lack of it has actually made startups and companies like myself and e-mobility companies actually create more refined business models that actually speak to more real-life situations. Like Tayo said, EVs have become more efficient, they become cheaper, they become more energy efficient. So the amount of funding you would have needed to roll out EVs a couple of years ago has dropped significantly. And the understanding and the perception and readiness is also there as well. So I think it's definitely created more innovative business models around battery as a service, energy as a service, lease to own, rental models, and I think we're slowly steering away from funding towards research and development and trying to figure it out. We're actually solving real life problems. So with that, I think it would actually grow the industry to be able to really fine tune unique business models that can speak towards tradable finance.
Okay, sounds good. So we've spoken about a couple of problems, right? So we've spoken about the funding problem, financing, the kind of incentives that governments also need to put in place. And yeah, but there's one really big problem that I'm sure you're aware of, and I think it's mostly what is always in the minds of people, which is the behavioral attitude to EVs, right? And the biggest one is, range anxiety, right? What if I'm traveling on Third Milan Bridge one day, and my battery suddenly dies, right? It's a fear, right? When we talk about EVs, I'm riding my bike. Oh, it's an EV bike. It's really fast. Oh, 0 to 60 in 0.1 millisecond. Nice. But how do I charge? How do I do this and that? So the question is, which one of these, right, do you think is the biggest problem, right? Out of, all these things that I've listed, which one is like, the one that could really hold back EV adoption in Africa? Let's start with you, Tolu.
Okay. I think I didn't get a chance to answer your second question on manufacturing these locally and actually having these products more affordable than the products that are coming in. So I think, and speaking to your question on which one is more important, policy, charging infrastructure, I think for me it will be policy, because policy would drive all of this. For instance, if there were high tariffs on cars that weren't assembled in Nigeria, it will encourage the local players to focus more on producing our own vehicles. And that will give us an advantage. Like Donald Trump said, sorry to keep referencing, but he said, ICE engines are getting more efficient over the years. They're becoming better. So in all this, where is Africa in terms of the technology race? So I think there's a new phase of technology from new energy vehicles, and I think Africa stands to gain the most because we rely on electric vehicles the most from the use of 2- and 3-wheelers, which is 85% of the transportation needs across Africa. And I think 65% of that rented or are financed, So I think Africa definitely has the opportunity to lead the space in creating small energy efficient vehicles that can actually work and solve operational logistics funding issues.
Okay, thank you very much, Tolu. So for you, Tayo, the range anxiety people have, the policies, the funding, which one could really hold back EV adoption in Africa?
Okay, I mean, I'm not really a big fan of one thing, because it's kind of like, what does it take for a human being to survive? You need the head, you need the heart, right? There's neither that is more important. So what we're talking about here ultimately is a system of essential critical parts. We've identified policy, as I mentioned, government policy and incentives, extremely critical, right? Funding, extremely critical. To the point around behavioral change, right? Of your EV going off. I think we all saw that picture maybe a year ago, of that Tesla that went off, and they had to bring a generator to charge it. I don't even know if it's real. I doubt it was real. People do all sorts of things to create content these days. But the EVs are not like Lagos Matatus or Lagos Danfo, right? How many of us here still took a Danfo recently? Okay, good. I thought you guys would be forming two here. But anyway, one of the fascinating things about a Danfo is when you get in and you look at the driver's dashboard, nothing works, right? And then you ask yourself, how does this guy know when the fuel fuel is zero, right? The thing is, the fuel gauge is in their head, right? The guy knows he bought 20 liters 3 hours ago, and he has driven between Ikeja and VI 3 times. And he knows for each trip, it's 3.5 liters. So you don't worry about it, be at peace. The fuel gauge is in the Danfo driver's head. With EVs, it's not like that, right? You can see your battery level, from 100% to, 90, 80, 70, 60. By the time it gets to 40, you should go and swap or you should go and charge, right? So range anxiety, I understand it, but a lot of it is more hearsay. In reality, it actually rarely happens that you run out of battery unless you deliberately ignore your dashboard and you're super careless about it. And then even if you get stuck, with two-wheelers and three-wheelers, a battery swap can be done, which means a battery can be delivered to you on your Sport and you can swap it out. With cars, okay, well, it gets a bit trickier. Maybe then we need to deliver a generator to you and charge your car for you. But I think for adoption, really, the big driver is affordability, really. So if you think about, in our use case, for example, for delivery drivers in Lagos, who will use about 6 to 8 liters of fuel a day, that would cost them at 900 naira to 1,000, it keeps fluctuating. They will spend anywhere between 6,000 to 9,000 naira on petrol every day. If you switch to electric on our platform, and I'm sure Tolu can share his numbers here as well, for about 2,000 naira or less, you can do one battery swap. That's the battery as a service model. And that battery can take you 80 to 100 kilometers. So for example, if you're a food delivery driver, you're not going too far distances around the neighborhood, you don't need more than one battery for the whole day. Can you imagine going from spending 6,000 to 9,000 naira on energy every day to spending 2,000? That means on that alone, you are saving 4,000 naira or more. Now, you can't argue with economics. So people are not stuck on any particular way of doing things, right? As long as their pocket it leaves their pocket better and it solves the same problem, people will make that switch like that in a heartbeat. So I think the real challenge for us in the space is really just scaling the product, getting the funding, getting more incentives and policies to favor the industry, and adoption will naturally just go through the roof.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Africa has a lot of, many African countries, for example, Nigeria, we have a lot of lofty ambitions when it comes to EVs, like, 30% of the cars on the road by 2033 should be EVs. Adetayo is already laughing. Things like that. I think Ethiopia said, I think even for Ethiopia, it's a bit more lofty, right? They even want to completely stop importation of ICE vehicles, like everybody should start driving EVs, things like that. Tolu, let's start with you. How feasible are these dreams?
I think they're extremely feasible. I think we're already almost there. If you look across Africa, East Africa in particular, there are hundreds of thousands of electric vehicles, and they're already paving the way and moving forward. In Nigeria as well, I think currently we estimate about 15,000 to 20,000. By the end of the year, maybe 100,000 to 150,000. So the trajectory that we're on and the current policies that we have kind of speak to us being able to make that target of 30%. But I think this needs to be part of a broader collective strategy amongst African nations to be able to really advance and be able to make the 30%, because we're looking at scale, which means production of vehicles, localization of EV value chains from charging infrastructure, and as I said, standardization as well, so that we make sure that we don't have certain EVs that can't work in certain regions or charging applications that can't work for other applications. So we need to look at how we can collaboratively come together and actually meet these goals. But I think currently the policies set in place, the motions, and the companies and all the different fleet deployments and their targets and projections actually do speak to at least a 20% uptake of electric vehicles.
All right. Yeah. So it's possible for Tolu. It's something that is feasible. Adetayo, same for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 100% agree with Tolu. It's really possible, right? As I said as well, it's already happening. The way I like to think about targets more is it's kind of like the annual percentage of the vehicles that are being deployed that are electric, right? Because if a market typically has demand for like Nigeria, for example, roughly about 1 million motorcycles a year, right, on the ICE engine side. I think the more important target is to say what share of that 1 million do we want to convert into electric over what period? So maybe, this year we are targeting 10%, which means 100,000 of all out of 1 million motorcycles in Nigeria for 2024 should be electric. By next year, we take it up further, 200,000. And then over a period of 5 to 10 years, we want to gradually replace the share of all new motorcycles that are being sold, all new cars that are being sold, all used cars that are being sold. That is a more, bottom-up, practical approach to think about the targets. And you can easily do that because customs has the data. They know how many of motorcycles, ICE engine are coming in. They know how many EVs are coming in. And the government can then create targeted policies or even set caps and say, we know it has to be a journey. No more than 500,000 petrol motorcycles can be imported into Nigeria going forward. That in itself automatically, because nature abhors vacuum, you see a lot more people scrambling to then go and fill that gap. And then maybe the financial institutions as well will then wake up and say, okay, there really is a policy here, there's a gap here that needs to be bridged. So, but short answer is the movement is already on, but I think it makes more sense to set targets to replace the number of new vehicles that have been deployed and dedicate them to electric and phase out ICE engines over a period of time.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to need the help of the media crew to pass microphones around so that people can ask their questions. So please help with mics for everyone that asks questions. I think we have 2 from this side and 2 from this side as well. All right. So before we get to the questions, just my own final question, which is, if you had, the question I prepared actually was 10 billion naira, then I realized, oh, 10 billion naira is small. What am I even saying? Right. But if you had $10 billion, right? And, let's say I give you the money. Let's assume that I just, out of the kindness of my heart, I just say, okay, Tayo, take 10 billion. Do you take 10 billion? And I say, I want to see EV adoption in Africa. Tolu, how would you spend that money? Tolu, the question is to you.
I already know how I'll spend it.
Okay. All right, Tayo. For you, how will you allocate those funds?
I'm sure Tolu is refusing to answer the question because then he will give out his strategy to everybody. But yeah, I think the energy infrastructure is very important. I would invest significantly in energy infrastructure to support EV rollouts. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yes. So we'll take the questions now.
Hello. Good morning. My main question is why, apart from maybe climate change or something, why should African countries really care about electric vehicles?
Okay.
What makes it a superior product to ICE vehicles? It's not just about the same mobility and everything. It's not even as if EV is actually cheaper. So why should we care?
All right. Who wants to take a stab at that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can take
Tolu?
this. Yeah, so I think, like Tayo mentioned, operationally, it's easier to maintain an EV, and it's cheaper as well to maintain. It's cheaper to recharge as well an EV. Studies have shown that clearly. I think another thing is we all complain that, there's not enough energy for our EVs, but I don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot of excess and underutilized energy all around the place, And like we mentioned earlier, policies would help as well. If we have subsidized energy tariffs as well, that would help encourage people, or even reduce the cost, because it's already about 30% of whatever you're spending daily operating an ICE engine. So for me, I think definitely the costs is better. Cleaner environments, reduction in heat. I always say this as well. Local riders love electric motorcycles because it doesn't emit heat like your normal ICE engine that emits heat. You can burn your leg on the exhaust and you vibrate. Once you jump off an Okada, you feel like you've just jumped off a ship or something. You feel seasick. So there are various advantages of electric vehicles. It's not just like everybody just wants to do EV because that's what the world is saying that we should do. It's actually more functional within Africa than even every other part of the world because we rely more on 2- and 3-wheelers for 85% of the things we do. So in that, 2- and 3-wheelers are more energy efficient than actually 4-wheelers. You know, the amount of energy you need to charge an electric Hilux, for instance, you can use that to deploy 10 tricycles, which you can use to carry 70 people, as of to 6 people. So I think definitely for Africa and for the Nigerian markets, I think electric vehicles is a go because most of our transportation is through smaller light vehicles, 2-, 3-wheelers and minibuses. So.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Let's take the next question.
First, I'd like to thank the speakers for the truly informative session. Something Mr. Adetayo said that really resonated within me was when he talked about not begging the banks and talking about how foreign investors might actually be the ones to actually benefit from this space. This is a conversation that actually ensued between myself and my dad. One time we were talking about how the fact is that most of these mineral resources, I believe that most of these mineral resources that are beneficial, that are mostly used to produce the batteries, which is the most expensive component of the electronic vehicle space. So I believe that these things like magnesium, cobalt, and nickel, they're actually found in Africa, right? And I find out that somehow it is still very expensive. This is crazily expensive. And my question is this, is that if South Africa is so rich in magnesium, if Rwanda, if all these African countries have these resources, and then it feels like we still have to spend so much in the EV space, I believe that probably, is there a way that a Pan-African movement can actually enhance, maybe make these prices reduced? Maybe we can get these prices at a reduced cost.
Okay, sure. I mean, this is a really fantastic question. It's something that I can't keep talking about this, and the broader themes around this question for hours, right? But let me start by actually casting our minds back. The reason why BYD is such a powerful company, and make no mistake, for BYD to scare Tesla, right? Like for BYD to be now viewed as a stronger company than Tesla is not trivial. Right? Tesla is run by Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a wizard, right? He's an incredible human who's built, 3 massive companies that have disrupted all the industries that they've been in, right? So if you follow Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, when they backed BYD in 2009, back then, outside of China, almost nobody knew BYD. The reason they backed BYD was because they believed that BYD was going to be more competitive long-term. Now, when you look at the founder of BYD, right, Wang Qianfu, he's originally a battery scientist. He's not a mobility guy. He's a battery scientist building batteries for smartphones originally. And then he realized, you know what, we can actually, I can build these batteries for EVs. And they've been working at it for decades. Now, over the years that they had been working on those batteries, they had also vertically integrated. Normally, the way manufacturing works is you source your materials from so many different people, and then you assemble some parts, and then you build it like Apple does. Apple sources the equipment from so many different people, and then they put it together in China, and they tell you it's made in America, but designed in California, but it's really made in China, but whatever. So what BYD did was they vertically integrated, right? And they built so many layers of capabilities such that when they bring everything together, their costs are so dramatically low. The BYD Seagull, free on board, you can buy that thing at $9,000. It's insane for an EV, right? Now, the reason I'm giving you all of that background is, there's one other point I want to add. If you look at what BYD did over the years and how they built multiple capabilities over decades, that wasn't also done in absence. You also look at the Chinese government, right? And we're not here to talk about politics or whatever you believe in, freedom or whatever, right? I like to call them the Chinese Communist Corporation. They're not a government, they're a corporation. The amount of efficiency with which governance is executed in China is mind-boggling. The Chinese government is more efficient than most private companies in Africa. Do you understand what that means? So when you look at the policy environment and the way the company was built and the capabilities they built, it explains why they've disrupted EVs globally and why Western countries have to now put up tariffs to prevent them from wiping out their local players. Now let's bring it down to Africa. Right? Okay, so you say we have nickel, manganese, cobalt. We have in Nigeria, if you look at the natural resource belt, DRC, the elephant in the room, they have tons of these raw materials, but the same DRC can't defend its borders against Rwanda, but that's another story. So take your mind off of the raw materials, because the reality is battery technology is already evolving beyond those materials. The other day, Niger kicked out France, I think it was Niger, from mining their uranium, right? And amongst the group that I was in, we laughed that they'll go find their uranium somewhere else. Like, don't celebrate raw materials. That's 50 years ago. If you don't give them raw materials from your continent, they'll find it somewhere else. If they can't find it somewhere else, they'll find another material for manufacturing batteries. Who says that batteries have to stop with lithium? There are new materials that are being used to build batteries that are that have higher performance, and over time, the cost will go down. All this is to say that forget raw materials. It matters, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter because it's transient. So the real question is this, are we organized enough in Nigeria as a continent, right, to begin to emphasize building finished products? Amount of discipline. It's not anywhere beleface type of stuff. If you're purifying, because the lithium cobalt that we're talking about, those things go through multiple layers of purification and processing. Multiple layers to produce the kind of quality that is required to build grade A batteries. So it's not like Nigeria can just wake up and say, oh, now we want to build our own batteries. Let's put a plant in Ogun State. Let's create a road, and then we start making batteries and shipping to the rest of the world. There are battery companies in Europe that failed. There's one that had raised $5–10 billion and failed in Europe. I think it's Sweden. Question is, why did they fail? We can unravel that. So it's not just about figuring out how to build nice batteries and process our cobalt. It's a deeper institutional question around the amount of discipline, patience, the value chain that's required, our ports. If we manufacture batteries in Nigeria, how easy is it to export it through that highly inefficient customs port to the rest of Africa? So the issues are multi-layered. I would say, there's my view, over time we might get there. Keyword is might. If we begin to build institutions and we begin to rethink our entire processes around governance, investments, discipline, standards, and so on. But until that happens, let's just bring our cells, our CATL cells from China, and let's assemble it in Ogun State and in Unewi and be using. That's my honest, humble take on this.
Thank you so much for that. So let's take the final question.
All right, thank you very much. I'm actually from Ghana. I joined this program from Ghana, and I want to say thank you to the panelists. He made mention of policies, right? Now, if we are comparing the Nigerian market to, let's say, the other African countries, Nigeria is a big space. And we are noticing that if certain policies are implemented here that works, that means the other African countries that have not embraced this we'll be able to also know that there is going to be, there is an avenue for us to grow in this sector. Now, what is the, how do you call it, then the EV industrialists here doing to ensure that they can get this thing, settled in Nigeria, and then how best are they looking to expand the idea to the other neighboring countries that have not fully embraced this? And if this can be incorporated properly, is Nigeria looking to spearhead this particular agenda? That is one. And then two, I'm looking at the EV vehicles that are actually being produced. Is there a future where these vehicles are actually going to be produced for large scale, let's say long distance vehicles? Because we know that our transport system in Africa does not only end with the shorter distance vehicles. So for, let's say, trailers, tractors, drivers that need to be doing very long distance, is there a future for these vehicles so that if Nigeria or Africa is implementing a policy that eradicates the use of fuel vehicles, are these also going to be factored in? And how easy will it be in terms of implementation? Thank you very much.
Okay, I think it's a multiple part question. So I think the first one is, will Nigeria be spearheading? I personally think there are other countries that other African countries that are already spearheading even before Nigeria. But Tolu, I don't know, which one of the questions would you like to take?
I can speak on policy.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I wouldn't really say Nigeria is spearheading, but I'll say we're preparing is a better term. So, like I mentioned earlier, we need to take advantage of what we already have, which a lot of people don't know about, which is between the NADDC, the Ministry of Finance, and the Customs. So you can actually apply for IDEC, which gives you an importation duty waiver on fully built and assembled units in SKD or CKD. Now, on the manufacturing end as well, you can get an assembler status, which reduces the cost drastically. And this allows you to be more competitive. So a lot of car sellers, vehicle financiers now are taking advantage of this. And that's why you're seeing a lot of EVs on the road. So I think that is the beginning, or that is the first step towards leading the policy across Africa. The second one would be on energy. Like Tayo mentioned, I mean, if we look at solar on average, you're looking at about 150 naira to 200 naira per kilowatt hour. If we look at gas, you're looking at 350 to 400 naira. Band A is about 200 and something, and I think diesel would be around 700 to 800 naira, depending. So, I mean, those are crazy numbers. So you can imagine running a charging station, for instance. Some days you might make money, some days with the collapse of national grid, you might be in the red. So we can't have that, So we need policies to encourage subsidizing energy tariffs for charging infrastructure providers, discos, and independent power providers, I think that's one of the missing links right now, because currently everything is set up to at least begin the adoption of electric vehicles.
Okay. All right. You want to take the other questions? I think it was about when do we get to large-scale productions, right? Yeah.
I would say baby steps, right? Let's build gradually. Let's grow from 100 to 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, and so on. You can, postulate about all the different complexities that need to happen for us to get to mega scale. But I think we've identified the components that we need to fix, right? More policies that favor infrastructure development. There's a lot of African countries that are really doing really well already. Rwanda is one, case in point. Ethiopia is another, even though they have a bit of a closed economy issue there, but they're very bold about EV adoption. Morocco is another one. Tesla just set up an office in Morocco a few days ago. And Morocco is attracting a lot of investments in the EV industry from China. There's nothing that stops Nigeria from doing that as well, and other African countries from following suit. So I think we will get there in terms of large-scale adoption. But I think the critical components and the simple things that needs to be done, as long as, Africa as a whole, through the instrumentation of the African Union, ECOWAS, and a bunch of these other regional organizations, once they come together, come up with policies, and those policies apply across the board, and we apply AFTA as well, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, then things will move a lot faster. But, if wishes were horses, beggars will ride. There's no point making big plans, big pronouncements, if we're not making the policy changes and taking very important decisions and executing on them. I think to your question around like Nigeria taking the lead, fully with Tolu on that, I think every country is moving at its own pace. If you want to follow any lead as an African country, my recommendation is, for now, just look outside. Look at India. Look at Nepal. Those guys are very aggressive. And Nepal is not a richer country. Nepal is also a struggling, developing country, right? Pakistan is not a rich country either. So I think there's a lot of cues that African countries can take from some of those countries to accelerate growth. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that's been a pretty interesting session. Please, a round of applause for us.